Welcome back to my podcast. Topic for today's discussion is patriotism relevant in today's context? This is going to be the format of a debate where I'm going to argue for the motion, yes, patriotism is relevant in today's international geopolitical arena. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to argue for the motion. Prove beyond question, doubt, and argument that patriotism is not an anachronism, but it's cogent and relevant in today's context. I am for the motion that patriotism is still relevant in today's context. It's not an anachronism, it's not dépasse, it's not obsolete. Love for one's country is still relevant today. How different is good patriotism from bad nationalism? They're both fluidic languages resonating with different connotations, ambivalent and polymorphic at the same time. But there's some difference. Patriotism per se is sheer love for one's country. Nationalism is jingoism, is chauvinism. Extreme nationalism is parochialism at its worst. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to argue for the motion that patriotism is relevant in today's context. I'd like to argue in toto and prove beyond question, doubt, and argument that patriotism will win. It's not an anachronism and it's still relevant in today's context. For starters, when did the idea or the concept of a nation or a country emerge? It was in 1648, the Treaty of Westphalia, when the state as a secular form began to contest the authority of the church and began to be the arbiter of justice. It was later, after World War I and World War II, when the idea of nationalism started emerging. When new countries started coming up in the world arena, Afro-Asian countries started getting independence, and the idea of a nation started emerging. In political science, a nation state is an entity that has a territory, a population, a government, and sovereignty. It was just a state. So combined with a nation state, it would mean a country that has citizens of a common raw historical straw, bound by common language, ethnicity, culture, civilization, ideals, and legacy. Benedict Anderson was an authority who said, a nation is an imagined, limited community. It's an imagined community, you don't get to see everyone. It's a limited community because it's bound by a territory. It's not pan-world. And he said, a nation is an entity that's open, joinable in time, bound by language and not by blood. It's intrinsically parochial and irredeemably particular because it's got a hidebound notion of itself. It's not a grand project where it embraces globalism and humanity. A nation is a hidebound, a narrow entity which protects and takes care of its civilizational entities. Nationalism is the love for its country in its extreme form. When did the idea of nationalism emerge? Well, it's the Germans, way back, the German literary movement, where they said poets are the creators of nationalism. Thinkers like Herder, Goethe, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Heidegger brought in the idea of nationalism. Heimatkund, Völkisch, and Volksgeist were the movements in Germany where they asked people to think through their blood. Nationalism was so much of blood and thunder, so much of melodrama, so much of emotions, and Germans were the forefront bringing it out. In 1930s, after World War, the countries that were defeated, Germany and Italy, Adolf Hitler started his movement of Nazi rule in Germany, where he created the myth of a nation, of the Aryans versus the Jews, the supremacy, social Darwinism of Hitler, and where he drummed up support using the myth, otherization of a nation. In Italy, Mussolini's fascist ideas also grew about one race, one country. So nationalism started emerging after World War II in a bigger fashion, where Arab nationalism, where the Afro-Asian countries started emerging from the clouds, the colonial yoke they were under. Nationalism was always an idea which brought about parochialism, extreme chauvinism, and pogroms and genocides. We had ethnic cleansing coming about. No wonder John Donne said, nationalism is the starkest political shame of the 20th century. Unspeakable horrors were committed in the guise of nationalism. Auschwitz is a glaring example. John Donne remarked, nationalism is the starkest political shame of the 20th century. Horrendous acts, unspeakable horrors, ethnic cleansing, and genocides were rampant, all in the name of nationalism. Nationalism is at the forefront today. We see parties of the far right, reactionary, conservative parties coming to the fore. Take the example of Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, which is an anti-Islamic far-right party which has come to power. Take the case of Argentina, where Xavier Milei won the elections. It's a far-rightist party again. In Italy, days after Mussolini in 1930s, now we have the Italian social movement, a neo-fascist party coming to power. And in France, Jean-Marie Le Pen is almost knocking the doors of the corridors of power. And in the United States, we have Trump coming in. And India, we've had a decade of rule of Hindutva's BJP. All far-rightist parties. What's happening to the world's liberal democratic ideals? In fact, there's a research by Pew which said 25% of the people who were surveyed wanted an authoritarian, a dictatorial government to the hell. So, credibility of liberal democracy is waning. What's happening? Why is the world veering towards the right? Why is the idea of nationalism coming to the forefront? People drum up support using the myth of a nation, otherization, an enemy that's been created. Well, in 1861, Massimo of Italy said, we have made Italy, we have to make Italians. So nationalism is per se not from below, it's also from above, where people create a state and bring in nationalism within that fold. So, ladies and gentlemen, are we looking at a scenario where nationalism is going to be at the forefront and nation state is going to be the primary horizon on which our moral obligations and political imaginations are going to be based on? We've had a situation where we have to battle the entity of the international relations. It's going to be nationalism. And we have Samuel P. Huntington in his Clash of Civilizations argue that future fault lines of conflict is going to be based on civilizational wars, nation states, nationalism. Well, at the other end, we have Francis Fukuyama, who in his book, The End of History and the Last Man, argued that liberal democracy has won the war of ideologies. But who is right? Nationalism is coming back. There's a revival, a renaissance of sorts, where the feelings for one's country is as strong as ever. The myth, the idea of a patria, a fatherland, a motherland, and people find solace in the very concept of a nation. So, where exactly is this all happening? Take the case of the short 20th century, which concluded much as it had begun. The political realignment of the political forces in Central and Eastern Europe, the turn of the century, has proven beyond question that instead of moving away from nation state, it's moving back. Statism, resurgence of the idea of a nation, is becoming stronger day by day. Nation state is being undressed from above and below. From above, we have the supranational agencies of the United Nations, IMF, CETO, and NAFTA. And from below, we have the tribal identities and a host of other entities like human rights, refugees, environmental concerns, new age social movements, disrobing and undressing nation from below. Well, coming back to the moot question, how relevant is patriotism? Well, Hans Morgenthau, the realist theory exponent in international relations, would argue in his book Politics Among Nations that nation state is the primary entity. It is the loci of political power and organization. So there's no escaping the fact that we have to live with nation states. So once nation state is imminent, and very much relevant today, I think patriotism is going to be relevant again, because people need to love their country, because there's no escaping the fact that nation states are going to be the primary components of international relations. Our moral imagination and political engagement is going to be bound. Look at it either way, we have to live with nation states. So the idea of patriotism, a love for its country, my country right or wrong, or as J.F. Kennedy said, don't ask what your country has done for you, ask what you've done for your country. This sense of belonging is important. Take the case of the multi-ethnic melting pot culture of the United States of America, where patriotism has redefined the contours of political imagination. Patriotism has nourished the idea of citizenship. A love for one's country has diminished the racial inequalities, has made the foreign policy more unilateral. Not much is happening between us and them after the 9/11 attacks in the United States. So patriotism has brought the differences of opinion. People started agreeing to disagree within themselves. Multi-ethnic population, the melting pot culture, has started to realize that love for its country can hold its own and keep America safe from the divisive forces that jeopardizes its own existence. Patriotism is important because it's your country which takes security of your concern whenever you're held up in a country stricken with war. So idea of peace and stability is brought about by the idea of patriotism. A nation state never ceases to exist, come what may. It is going to be the locus of power and political engagement and authority and organization for days to come. Whether we like it or not, politics and nation states are bound to be there. Take the case of right to self-determination, the human rights concept of nationalism, sub-nationalism within nationalism. Scotland in the United Kingdom, Catalonia in Spain, and the area that straddles southwestern France and northern Spain, the Basque region, and the French-speaking region of Canada, the Quebec, and the Tamils in Sri Lanka. We've had nationalist feelings coming to the fore and jeopardizing the very existence of the sovereignty of a nation. So what happens in this context? Where do you draw a line between the sovereignty of a country, nationalism, human rights, and other ethical questions? That's where the problem arises. So we'll have to have some sort of a patriotic feeling towards your country, to hold your country together amidst the ruins and the ravages of international politics. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just coming back to the question, the moot question, is patriotism relevant? Of course it is. The very idea that nation state is going strong and is going to determine and resonate amidst the all confusing paradigms of international relations, I think a love for its country matters. It helps nourish citizenship, it brings in more solidarity, and it helps social redistributive policies, and also bring in a unilateral foreign policy wherein immigrants are accepted within the fold of patriotism of a country like United States of America. So putting two and two together, I would like to argue in toto and prove beyond question, doubt, and argument that patriotism is there to stay, and it is relevant to today's context.